The Brown Divest Coalition, or BDC, is a coalition of student organisations, many of whom openly describe the murder, rape, mutilation, torture and kidnapping of Israeli civilians as just acts of resistance, which demanded that Brown University harm its own interests and violate its own values by divesting from the world's only Jewish state. The BDC's divestment proposal is filled with falsehoods, framing Israel's actions of self-defence in an imaginary narrative of genocide and apartheid. After camera exposed dozens of these lies, Brown University rejected divestment from Israel. Notwithstanding its defeat, the BDC's proposal serves as an important case study in how anti-Israel activists lie to advance their own cause. Let's take a look. The BDC claims the Boycott, Divest and Sanctions BDS movement was founded in 2005 as a grassroots, non-violent Palestinian civil society movement, inspired by protests against South African apartheid. While the formal BDS movement was founded in 2005, it in fact grew out of an organised boycott that began years before the rebirth of Israel in 1948. In 1945, the newly formed Arab League instituted a boycott of Jewish goods and services in the British Mandate for Palestine, pledging to combat Zionist industry. Activists claim the boycott began in 2005 in an attempt to erase its controversial anti-Semitic origins. The current iteration of the movement began with the infamous 2001 Durban Anti-Racism Conference, which the late Congressman Tom Lantos, a Holocaust survivor, described as the most sickening and unabashed display of hate for Jews I had seen since the Nazi period. The NGO Forum, the civil society portion of the conference, called for boycotting the Jewish state when they weren't too busy handing out flyers glorifying Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust. The NGO Forum's outcome document attempted to revive the UN's infamous 1975 Zionism as racism slur and called for the complete and total isolation of Israel. BDS began as an anti-Jewish boycott movement, and the attempt to link it to the struggle against racism in South Africa is pure fiction. Among the BDC's demands is recognising the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. The truth is that Israeli law already guarantees the equal rights of all Israel's citizens, regardless of race or religion. While gaps exist between various demographics, as in any democratic and pluralistic society, the disparities in Israel are substantially less in many respects than in Western Europe. Contrast this to Arab and Muslim states in the region, where religious minorities live as second-class citizens at best, and to Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, where the law explicitly discriminates against Jews. Another BDC demand is respecting, protecting and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. The right of return is a myth created to sustain the Arab world's hope that Israel will be wiped off the map. Resolution 194 is not legally binding. Moreover, it was rejected by the Arab parties who subsequently refused to negotiate with Israel as called for in the resolution. It is purely a recommendation and never uses the word right. The language also conditions any return on Palestinians' willingness to live at peace with their neighbours. Considering Palestinians' widespread support for the atrocities carried out by Hamas on October 7th, in March 2024, 71% called the decision to launch the attack a correct one. That condition clearly has not been met. The Palestinian Authority provides financial rewards to those who commit terror attacks against Israelis through the Pay for Slave Fund, including participants in the October 7th massacre. PA leader Mahmoud Abbas recently referred to the deceased terrorist leader Ismail Haniyeh as a martyr and declared, "We adhere to Sharia law, victory or martyrdom." So much for Palestinians wanting to live at peace with their neighbours. The BDC claims while Palestinian citizens of Israel are permitted to vote and hold office, they may be forbidden by the Supreme Court of Israel if they engage in negation of the existence of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. This rule applies to all Israeli citizens regardless of religion or ethnicity. It's similar to oaths of office across the world, including the United States, where the president swears to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. In the UK, the head of state is even required to be a member of the Church of England. The BDC also claims that according to the UNRWA, 5.9 million Palestinians are refugees today. UNRWA does make this claim, but it uses an absurd definition of refugee that it only applies to Palestinians. The universal definition of refugee, found in the 1954 Refugee Convention, requires an individual to meet a set of requirements to be considered a refugee. The UNRWA definition waives these requirements for Palestinians, automatically granting refugee status to all patrilineal descendants of the original refugees, while UNRWA deceptively claims there are 5.9 million Palestinian refugees. The true figure was estimated to be fewer than 200,000 in 2021. Look at the Hadid family. Sisters Bella and Gigi were born in the United States to a wealthy real estate developer. According to UNRWA, these American fashion models are still refugees. If the unique definition of refugee applied to Palestinians were applied to Jews driven out of Arab and Muslim countries, there would be millions of Jewish Israelis considered refugees, with a right of return to countries like Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. The BDC claims BDS is at its core a non-violent struggle. That's like calling the Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses a non-violent struggle. It divorces the boycott from the larger, virulently anti-Semitic movement of which it is only one element. Omar Barghouti, the founder of BDS, admits that the boycott is complementary to terrorism and violence.
We're not ashamed to have armed resistance as well as peaceful resistance throughout our existence.
The BDS movement itself has direct ties to terrorist groups including Hamas, the PFLP, and Islamic Jihad. The BDC asserts that as founding member of the BDS movement, Omar Barghouti articulated BDS targets complicity, not identity. What else has Barghouti said?
Definitely, most definitely, we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. No Palestinian, rational Palestinian, not a sellout Palestinian, will ever accept a Jewish state in Palestine.
For the founder of the BDS movement, it's clear that this is absolutely about identity. BDS activists have regularly targeted Jewish community organisations with no real connection to Israel or involvement in any alleged crimes. Take the Boston Mapping Project, which targeted Jewish teen foundations, day schools, disability service organisations, synagogues and other Jewish cultural centres. Even organisations sharply critical of Israel were listed for being Jewish. BDS activists have regularly promoted anti-Semitism and gone after Jewish individuals and institutions, and even worked to deny Jewish students access to kosher food. The BDC claims that BDS does not promote a one-state over a two-state solution, or vice versa. Participating in a divestment campaign would not require Brown to back one political solution over another, but rather side with bare minimum human rights law. This is a blatant lie. BDS openly promotes positions that are steps towards the destruction of the Jewish state. Take the imaginary right of return, about which Omar Barghouti has said, "You cannot reconcile the right of return for refugees with a two-state solution. A return for refugees would end Israel's existence as a Jewish state. A two-state solution was never moral and it's no longer working." The BDC makes frequent references to South Africa and comparisons to its anti-apartheid leaders. But there's no one among Palestinian leadership who can be compared with anti-racist South African activists today. Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, is a notorious bigot who wrote an entire PhD dissertation denying the Holocaust. The PA actually does have laws akin to the racist apartheid laws of South Africa, such as barring land sales to Jews and prohibiting Jews from worshipping at their holy sites. The leaders of Gaza are Hamas, an explicitly genocidal and anti-Semitic terrorist organisation. The other most popular Palestinian political figure, Marwan Barghouti, is a convicted terrorist serving 5 life sentences for the murders of 5 Israelis. These are the individuals to whom the BDC seeks to give increased political power and legitimacy with the help of Brown University. The BDC claims shrinking sources of clean water endanger ever larger numbers of Palestinian civilians, and Israeli refusal to admit fuel for desalination plants has forced vulnerable populations to depend on water that is highly salinated or polluted. The truth is that Israel has repaired and opened 3 water pipelines into Gaza, which can provide 31,000 cubic litres per day. 2 additional pipelines constructed from Egypt provide an additional 10,000 cubic litres per day. These pipelines alone can provide enough clean water for a large majority of Gazans. And the claim that Israel has refused to emit fuel for desalination plants is simply false. Israel is not to blame for the decrepit state of Gaza's water infrastructure. The PA was given total control of Gaza's water infrastructure in 2005 when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the territory. Since taking control, Hamas has severely mismanaged the infrastructure and openly boasted about digging up water pipelines to turn them into rockets meant to kill Jews. The BDC claims 93% of Gazans are currently facing crisis levels of hunger as a result of Israeli policies that seek to induce extreme deprivation on the captive population. Wrong again. Israel has continuously scaled up its efforts to facilitate humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Over 800,000 tons of food aid had been delivered to Gaza through mid-September 2024. Despite hysterical reports of famine, which turned out to be based on inaccurate and incomplete data, international agencies have acknowledged the food security situation has improved in Gaza. Even the United Nations, no friend of Israel, has admitted that the main impediment to delivering food aid to those who most need it is not Israel, but rather organised criminal groups and looters, including Hamas. The BDC claims that in Gaza, more than 100 journalists have been murdered. First, many of the individuals the BDC calls journalists turned out to be members of terrorist organisations actively engaged in attacks against Israelis. Some, like Al Jazeera's Ismail Al-Ghul, even participated in the October 7th massacre. Other supposed journalists, such as Abdallah Ajmal, held Israeli hostages in their own homes. Many worked for media outlets directly connected to terror groups. With the murder charge, the BDC is alleging criminal intent with no evidence that the journalists were targeted for being journalists, as opposed to being targeted for their terrorist activities or being tragic cases of collateral damage and a complex combat environment in a war initiated by Hamas. Similarly, the BDC claims more than 100 aid workers affiliated with the United Nations were murdered in the first month of bombardment alone. Once again, the BDC offers no evidence to back up its charge that Israel was targeting aid workers. These accusations simply cannot be taken seriously. Hamas systematically exploits civilian infrastructure and special protections, turning entire UN compounds into military centres. And overwhelming evidence shows that the UN has employed hundreds of members of terrorist organisations, some of whom participated in the October 7th atrocities. Calling these individuals aid workers who were murdered disregards not just the truth, but basic decency. The BDC claims that Israel launched its war on Gaza in October 2023. But Israel did not launch a war on Gaza. Palestinian terrorists launched the war on Israel on October 7th, invading the Jewish state and murdering, raping, torturing, and kidnapping Israeli civilians. This is only a sampling of the lies and distortions the BDC used to pressure Brown University to divest from the world's only Jewish state. If there were a real moral case for divestment, why would they have to lie?